Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Prairie Podcast. It's so wonderful to have you with us here for the Faith and Work series that we're going through. I've got a wonderful guest with us today, so wherever you're coming from, whether it's from near or it's far, you are welcome to the episode, and I'm so excited that you're listening in with us here because we've got Richard with us, Richard Marples. So why don't you introduce yourself to us? Tell us a bit about who you are. Give us a bit of a background if you're willing.
Sure. Yeah, my name's Richard. Born in England and moved to Canada a million years ago and done a lot of things since then. My wife Jennifer works here at the college. I used to work in the aviation, seconded from Mission Aviation Fellowship, which is a whole other story. Three kids, all married. My two sons graduated from the aviation program here. So
Well, very good. Great. So we got a bit of a background on who you are. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing? Tell us some about that if you're willing there, yeah.
Sure. I always wanted to be a pilot. I was one of those ones that, like when I was 4 years old, I'd see the airplanes going over and look up at the sky. And I have a T-shirt that says, I don't always stop to look at the airplanes. Yeah, yes, I do. And so I always wanted to be a pilot. You fast forward a little bit in, junior high, high school, I felt called into mission aviation. So pursued that, went to, learned how to fly, went to Bible college. Got some experience, and then the family, Jennifer and I and the kids, we ended up overseas in Papua New Guinea, north of Australia, ministering with Mission Aviation Fellowship.
Mhm.
We stayed there for about 17 and a half years or so, doing things there. Then felt that it was time to come back to Canada. Long
Yeah.
story there as well, but felt that we weren't completed with Mission Aviation Fellowship yet. Unfortunately, Mission Aviation Fellowship at that time was in the process of formalizing relationship with Prairie College to
Yeah.
manage the aviation program. So we came here to work in that and was there for about 5 years doing that. As I said, my two sons graduated from the program, so were familiar with it a little bit and worked with a lot of pilots who graduated from that program
Hmm.
in Papua New Guinea as well. And during our time here, then, and working through it with our sons, and also from my background, the aviation program that I took at a Christian university, um, it sort of became clear that as Canada becomes, dare I say, less and less Christian, there's a mission field here too. And so during my time at Prairie, we were talking about
Hmm.
mission aviation, but also aviation as mission.
Yeah.
And so when Jennifer and I felt that our time with Mission Aviation Fellowship was drawing to a close and started looking for other opportunities, I ended up doing one of the two things I swore that I would never do. One was be a flight instructor, which I did a lot of, and the other one was fly for an airline.
Hmm.
And so I currently fly for an airline, which has put me right in the middle of what I talked about for a lot of years, which is aviation as mission.
Hmm.
And so, I fly for a job, put bread on the table. But it's interesting as that plays out day by day and the different people I fly with, what it looks like to be a believer in the workplace.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, I'm curious. You've shared a little bit about some of the work you've been doing, but I'm curious personally. Would you mind sharing with us some of your testimony? Kind of what's been your faith journey like up to this point? What are some highlights, if you're willing to say that with us here?
So, like I said, I was born in England to a family that always went to church, and I
Yeah.
think that's because my mom and dad were raised that you go to church. It's what you do.
Hmm.
So I'm the youngest of four children, and so as long back as I can remember, Sunday you get up. That was back in the day when you got dressed, you put on your tie, whatever. So even as a little kid, put on my tie, and we would go to church. And my dad was a professor of mechanical engineering at a university in England, and he had the opportunity when I was 6, 7 to come to Canada for a year to do a swap.
Hmm.
They called it sabbatical exchange then, and we came to Ottawa, and my dad taught at Carleton University for a year.
Okay.
And so we got up on Sunday morning, and well, we go to church. And so my parents opened the phone book because that was a thing back then. Google didn't exist. I'm that old. They opened it up and looked for something that said Methodist because that's what we did. And they found this thing that said Wesleyan Methodist.
There you go.
So we went to the Wesleyan Methodist Church. Now, I was only 6, so I don't recall much, but the family folklore suggests that mom and dad were a little bit, as they say in Australia, gobsmacked because these people seem to actually believe this stuff. So our experience was more church as a social club, and here we were suddenly faced with people who believe this stuff, and as my parents would say, a bit too stubborn to be driven away by these Bible believing people. So we went back the next Sunday, and the next Sunday, and the next Sunday. Fast forward a few months, and because it was back in the day, I guess it still is, where you sent your kids to summer camp, so a week of summer camp,
Mhm.
church camp, and so I was at church camp as a little 7-year-old kid. And I remember very clearly, we do all the things they do, swimming, you do crafts, and you do Bible, whatever. And the evening, there's I don't know what you call it, service time, whatever. I remember very clearly the lady speaking there, and God speaking to my heart about needing Him at 7 years old.
Yep.
And I don't remember much, but my guess my mom was there, and she remembers that they did this invitation because that's what we did back then, altar calls. If you want Jesus, then you should come forward. And mom says, I guess I just stood up and I went, and I remember being very clear that's what I needed.
Yep.
We went back to England, and life went on. And then a couple years later, mom and dad felt called into ministry. We moved back to Canada, and at age 14, I ended up in the same tabernacle, the same church building, at the same church campground, feeling that God was calling me to be a missionary pilot. And I
Hmm.
spent some time talking to the speaker and saying, "How do I know? How do I know? What is this?" And we followed on down that track, and over the years, God confirmed that in several ways that this is what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Met Jennifer, got married, and she knew all along that's what we are supposed to be doing, and she was on board with that. And we ended up overseas and had lots of adventures and lots of experience with God showing up in interesting ways. I wrote this little book called Unexpected, and I think that was a bit of a definition of our
Hmm.
time overseas. The first couple of years, everything is new and exciting, and you see it.
Yeah.
After that, you kind of have to be actively looking because the extraordinary becomes ordinary.
Hmm.
And so over the years, we had to continue to be aware that this is amazing.
Yep.
This thing that happened today was amazing. It was God at work.
Yep.
And so we saw that as we went. And then I think just, as we've continued on, we continue to see God at work in all sorts of things. In our coming out here to Prairie, I guess even before that, in the time that we left New Guinea and being back in Canada for some stuff as our children were transitioning to life and adulthood in Canada. It was important that we were here in the country, and so just the timing
Hmm.
and God's direction in that. Even in my process of moving out of mission aviation, fell into just regular aviation, the way that God has led us into the first job that I went to, and then into the job that I have now.
Yeah.
You can just see that He is there preparing the way ahead as we go day by day. So,
Wonderful.
and then watching in our kids too, the way God's leading them as they become more adult.
Yep.
It's good to see that too. So,
Of course. Well, wonderful. Thanks for sharing some of that background with us there. What a cool testimony, a great story there. I loved hearing a little bit of kind of the journey of your parents and how that eventually influenced you and the way that God spoke to you through the years and guided you down that path. I think that's a great testimony there, reminder for all of us there. So you shared a little, you've shared some of that. You've shared about some of the work you're doing and the way you're engaging with that and the things you enjoy. Uh, and you've mentioned this briefly, but let's talk about those coming together. You're a practicing Christian. You've got this faith background, this belief in Jesus, and you're following Him. How does that affect your work as a commercial pilot working with this airline? How does that play out? Maybe you have your open conversations, but are there any other ways that that affects it?
I think there's two things that I think about regularly when I go. One is and I can never remember the order, which is bad. But it talks about is it a Paul planted and Apollos water, but God gave the increase, whichever it is that Paul and Apollos did. I'm just constantly aware that because my turnover with the people I fly with is so great, I don't necessarily have an opportunity to build a relationship.
Yep.
But I do have an opportunity to plant a seed. And when I say plant a seed, I was constantly aware when I was a pilot in Papua New Guinea
Hmm.
um, of the fishbowl.
Yeah.
And so we'd land the airplane at some very remote jungle location, and there would be, depending on where you're at, there could
Hmm.
be 50 people. There could literally be 1,000 people
Yeah.
just watching. It was better than television. What's coming on the airplane? Who's going out on the airplane? What's happening?
Yep.
Very, very much aware on a daily basis that I was being watched by all these people. That I would never have the opportunity to explain if I behaved poorly. I would never have that chance. So I was very aware that I was in that moment Jesus to them.
Yep.
And this may not be entirely theologically sound, but Jesus may well be being judged by me.
Yep.
And so I was very aware of that. And so as I go to work now, I'm also aware that the people that I fly with, I may be the first real, what would the word be?
Like touch
Meeting,
point.
yeah, with Jesus and with evangelical Christianity. There's so
Hmm.
much on out there today on the, as the kids say, the interweb. So much out there that's negative
Yeah.
about belief, about organized religion, if you want. And so I'm keenly aware that at some point they may come in contact with something further down the road, and whether they engage or not may be dependent on their remembrance of what Christianity looked like in the cockpit with me. Yeah,
Fascinating.
interesting.
Okay, so you've shared about some of your kind of the way your faith is playing out, and you're planting these seeds, and you're recognizing you're being watched. I'm curious. I'm fascinated to hear. Would there What kind of motivations are for that? What kind of fuels that? Was there someone that kind of mentored you in this way that influenced you? Maybe it's just, you see it in scripture and you want to play that out, and it's just Jesus living through. I'm curious, would you mind expanding? Is
Yeah,
there some motivating factors or something?
Jennifer and I went to Papua New Guinea with Mission Aviation Fellowship, and people always say to us, "How long are you going to stay?" We have a son and daughter-in-law and two grandkids now with Mission Aviation Fellowship in South Sudan, and people ask them, and they say, "Yes, so how long are they going to stay?" And the answer is, well, until God says it's time to go, I guess.
Yeah.
It tends to be what the answer is. And so, we finished our first 2 years in Papua New Guinea, and we were going to come back to Canada for a short break and stuff. And we stood on the deck of our house looking through the banana trees out across the Pacific Ocean. It was wonderful. And we said, so I guess we should answer the question, are we coming back? We literally had that conversation. We literally
Huh.
said, and it was almost that simple. Well, are we coming back? And we said, well, yeah, I guess. But as I look back on those first couple of years, I see some ways, sometimes that I responded to things or dealt with things, and I thought, well, that wasn't very cool,
Yeah.
considering I'm supposed to be the missionary.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think it's just part of a growth process of recognizing that I need to be just constantly aware, um, and not, I don't know how to describe it, not pushing Jesus down, not suppressing Jesus, but allowing him to be there, and asking him to be there as well.
Hmm.
So it's just been part of a process, mostly fueled, I guess, by my time in New Guinea. Everybody knew who we were.
Yeah.
We would go to the local market, which wasn't common for non-Papua New Guineans. If you were there as a business person, you tended not to go there,
Yep.
but we did go there, and I'd walk down. I'd sometimes take the kids with me, go Saturday morning to get our fruits and vegetables, whatever. And you could hear as you went by, there'd be MAF pilot, pilot, and everybody knew who we were. Everybody knew what we were doing.
Yep.
And I'd drive down the street. The little kids would yell out, just wanting me to wave and say hi. And so I'm just so keenly aware that people know,
People know. Yep.
and I need to be, yeah, I need to be Jesus to these people, because I may be the
Hmm.
only one they ever see,
Yep.
or the first point of contact, or I may be the one that that if I do something and somebody else shows up to water the sea, they'll say never again because of that guy, or
Hmm.
maybe they'll say, tell me more because I want to know. And so in the culprit, why is it, I want to be that one that at some point down the path, somebody will come to maybe one of those crew members, and they'll say, you know what about, and they'll say, well, there was that guy I flew with that one time, and I did kind of wonder why.
Yep. Final question for you. Thinking of ways that God has shown up or ways that God has led you, I'd be curious to hear lately what's something that God's been teaching you or guiding you and reminding you of. Is there a verse or just an encouragement that you've been working through?
Back when I was younger, I was saying hymns.
Yep.
All to Jesus I surrender. All to him I freely give. And then there was a thing that our kids watched, the I can't remember. It's like a kids video thing, and they did a song. The Donut Man, the Donut Man.
Yes.
They did
Yep.
a song which was about all or everything, like in all things. You mean everything? Like everything? Everything? And so we talk about we ask people, what are you willing to surrender for the sake of the call?
Yeah.
And there's some songs that go back to the 80s, 70s, 80s, contemporary Christian stuff that talks um, about, what are you willing to give for the sake of the call? And the Bible is clear, leaving father and brother and sister and mothers. And you talk about when Jesus came and called the disciples, leave your boats. You mean like right now? And they left their livelihood and they left their families. And
Mhm.
and and so when we talk about what are you willing to surrender, when Jennifer and I first went overseas, they had us sign a letter called "Statement of Burial on the Field,"
Hmm.
and that's like pretty in your face, right? It's like you could die doing this, and where do you want your earthly remains to be? Because we're not necessarily bringing them back to Canada. Are you prepared to be buried overseas if you should die? And I'm like, what do you mean I could die? And so you're prepared to you meet this. You have to answer that question: am I prepared to die? But in 2012, when stuff was happening in New Guinea, I suddenly got slapped in the head with the thing that I suddenly discovered I wasn't prepared to surrender.
Hmm.
And I was a bit surprised because, I thought I'd given all. I'd come overseas. I'd brought my children. They'd had malaria. My wife had had heart condition stuff. We had no pennies to rub together. I'd been threatened with having my throat slit. I'd had a bullet pass through the airplane. Somebody tried to shoot me out of the sky. I mean, this stuff had happened. I thought I've surrendered all, and then suddenly I found out that I hadn't.
Hmm.
Um, and I hadn't surrendered to God everything, and by that I meant I was still holding tightly to reputation and perception of people.
Hmm.
And I continue to work through that. It pops up from time to time, not necessarily in a bad way, but reminders of, and it's almost like God's poking it a little bit and say, "Have you surrendered it properly, truly? Are we still there? Is it a journey?" And it's a journey that I'm on in
Yeah.
that one. Loyalty of people and things like that. It was a bunch of stuff that happened, and it's interesting you ask because there was something else that came up this week, not in a negative way, just a reminder
Yeah.
of where are we at with that.
Hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, I don't know where we're at with that.
Don't know. Well,
So,
well, thanks for sharing that with us, Richard. I really appreciate that, and it's a valuable question. I think you propose is how much are you willing to surrender? And if you said, okay, I'm going to surrender all, have you actually surrendered all?
yeah, I think
And
the key
thinking through,
question is what are we not willing to surrender? We ask
yes.
ourselves, what are we willing? And we pick the stuff that we know we are. But if I ask you, what are you not willing to surrender? That's the harder question. And
Hmm.
and I don't like going there.
Yep.
But I found out the thing that at this point, yeah, that I have to work on. Yeah.
But that's
So,
where it's actually really cool because then you can bring that to God and say, I'm
yeah.
struggling with letting this go. What do I do?
Yeah.
you know, and I believe God is able to work with us through that and guide us. And sometimes we'll do it and then we'll take little pieces of it back and then he'll remind us. He'll
Yeah,
remind
I
us of
think
that.
sometimes we don't even realize we're taking the pieces back, and then
Yeah.
he reminds us. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's very gracious. So,
Yep.
yeah,
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Richard, for sharing with us some of your stories, perspectives, thoughts, and everything that you said today on the episode. I'm curious, in light of everything we've talked about, do you have any final words for our listeners?
we're fortunate, blessed to be from a faith family. My parents were brought up to be in the church,
Hmm.
not necessarily as believers, but then they found God and followed on from Him. And my brothers and sisters took up that. I do claim to be the black sheep because my brother and sisters and in-laws all end up in some level of pastoral ministry, some of the black sheep. I was just the missionary, but and so I'd like to remind my kids, right, that it's the the blessings that they currently receive are a result of the faith journey that their grandparents took, and
Hmm.
so we remind them, and so it's interesting to try and help them as they are, you know, as my daughter says, fully functioning adults.
Yeah.
Just continue to figure out how to
Hmm.
make sure. And now as grandkids come along, right?
Yep.
It's not just about me.
Yep.
I have a thing to pass on to the generations below me. I have a blessing from what's before, and I need to continue to work to pass that on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly, passing it on. That almost ties back to what you're talking about. People are watching you. but your faith journey impacts your kids, your grandkids, and that
Yeah.
carries on. And so, for
Yeah.
all of you out there, remember that. Remember the value that and the influence you can play on other people's lives too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, thank you everyone for listening to the episode. And if you want to learn more about Richard, you can find a way to contact him. Maybe, uh, maybe you want to read his book. I don't know where they get your book from.
Well, it used to be on Amazon, but it's not anymore. But I have some in my basement, so you know.
So track down Richard, get to his basement, find a book.
There we go.
Perfect. And if you want to learn more about Prairie College, you can head to our website, www.prairie.edu. Head to our social media to learn about some of the other episodes, some other people we've got on the podcast. We've got a great selection of people that we've been hearing from, and I look forward to everyone else for the rest of the year. So thank you once again for joining us today, and thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yep.